If there's any gaming market that Nintendo has had a complete stranglehold on over the years, it's the handheld gaming market. Lots of other companies have tried to get into that, all of which would end up failing except for Nintendo, most of the time at least. I feel like a lot of that success is thanks to the fact that Nintendo understands how to make a good handheld game more than anybody else. They realize that for people who want to be playing games on the go, massive ones that you have to commit a lot of time to in each session aren't necessarily going to work the best. They need to be experiences that you can take small bites out of now and then. To be completely honest, handheld gaming has traditionally been at best secondary for me. I'm not the type to really bring something with me when I go out, and since I live in the middle of nowhere now, I don't really find myself riding public transport that often. But that hasn't always been the case. When I was a kid, I would bring my Game Boy. When I was a kid, I would always bring my Game Boy everywhere with me. Tetris, Super Mario Land, Donkey Kong 94, and plenty of other games were constants in my life in the late 90s and early 2000s. However, until I got a DS for Pokemon Diamond, that Game Boy was really all I had, so unfortunately I had to miss out on basically everything that came in between. Okay, that isn't exactly true. I did get a Game Boy Advance in 2001, but I never really got a chance to use it. See, my family would take trips down from the snow-buried Ontario to Florida every few years, and coincidentally, one of those trips coincided with that particular gift. For a little while, I was inseparable with the new Advance and took it everywhere with me. I didn't have any games for it, but just having it was enough. Being able to imagine all the great games I'd be able to play on it made me so excited. And one day, we decided to head to the beach. Yeah, I think some people here can probably see where this is going. This was back in the day, well before anything was waterproof, and despite not wanting to actually swim, I went up to the shoreline with my GBA in my pocket. And of course, I got hit by a big wave and into the drink went me. I was a dumb kid. Ever since that day, my previous GBA never worked right. I probably only really need to replace the screen, but that was never an option back in 2002. At least that's what I thought. Actually, in preparation for this video, I actually went and found my old GBA again, and it was working 5 minutes ago. My Game Boy Advance doesn't work. Sorry for going down memory lane there, but that was a very important turning point in my gaming tastes. Because of that, I had to stick with my N64 as my primary gaming system for a lot longer than I normally would have. I obviously loved that thing, and thanks to it was able to fall in love with Paper Mario, but it's also largely thanks to that one event that I, up until this day, have never really played any of the games in the Mario and Luigi series. Yeah, I know there's more than a bit of a rivalry between these two franchises, but despite effectively being 100% on Team Paper Mario, I never actually bought into that tribalism. I just never had the hardware I needed at the time to start. And by time I did get a DS, which could play the game, it was kind of old news, and since I had a GameCube at that point as well, my handheld gaming time was spent with a very few, very specific games. It didn't help that this was the mid-2000s and game rental stores didn't carry handheld games for the most part, at least where I lived, so once a game left a store's shelves, it became a lot harder for a kid like me to get a hold of them. I've always sort of wanted to play them. I even bought Dream Team on my 3DS, but with that starting point, it just didn't take. But considering I just went through all of the Paper Mario games over the past year, I figured it would be a great time to head back and take a journey through Mario's other RPG series, starting with the GBA original, Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. Now, why am I doing the originals rather than the updated remakes which have more content? Well, it's primarily due to the fact that I like the look of the 2D sprites a heck of a lot more than the 3D models of the 3DS games, that and the fact that Superstar Saga was just added to the Nintendo Switch Online service, which kinda made the decision very easy. But anyways, let's take a journey through Mario and Luigi just in time for the 20th anniversary of the series and see what could have been if I was a little bit smarter as a kid. And just before we get started, this video is brought to you by me. Yeah, I'm a one-man band here, making these videos in my spare time while also working another full-time job. If you like what I do and want to help me make more, better videos faster, you could do me a solid and subscribe to the channel and maybe even like the video. And I promise I won't make a habit out of asking, but if you really want to help me out, you could join my Patreon. You'll get special recognition after every video, get to see them all early, and I may even start posting some exclusive stuff there too. Anyway, sorry for the ad, let's get on with the actual video. The game starts out with some emissaries of the Bean Kingdom, a neighbor of the Mushroom Kingdom, showing up for some diplomacy. They've brought gifts, which is always nice, but as the two approach Princess Peach, they transform and in the chaos, spray the princess with some sort of gas and escape, their mission apparently complete. Cut to Mario in Luigi's house, a toad comes rushing in with the news. All Mario needs to hear is Princess Peach, and he's on his way to the castle to help, bringing along Luigi kicking and screaming. It turns out that what the two intruders took was Peach's voice and replaced it with explosions. Luckily, Bowser is already there and he offers to take Mario to the Bean Kingdom so he can get Peach's voice back, since there's no way he'd want to kidnap a princess that would destroy his castle by speaking. Oh, and as an aside, am I the only one who thinks Bowser's sprite here looks weird? It's fine in the tutorial battle, but outside of that, it's just off. Anyways, Mario has a voice to retrieve, so he heads off to board Bowser's airship, and Luigi joins to send him off. But since it's Luigi's unlucky day, his well-wishing gets interpreted as a plea to join the cause, so he gets scooped up by the cruiser as it takes off, meaning both brothers are heading off on a journey together, probably for the first time. In order to get into the Bean Kingdom, the brothers will need passports with valid photos, of course, so we take them on the ship. You could take nice, official-looking photos, or you could be a complete goofball and strike a funny pose, which brings me to the first thing I want to talk about in this game, its tone and writing. See, in 2003 there had only been two other Mario RPG games like ever, Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario. While the tones of these games were very different, Super Mario RPG was a very Squaresoft game and felt like one in a lot of ways, and Paper Mario, while still a bit more lighthearted and cozy, was still earnestly attempting to tell its story. However, despite their differences, they still satisfied a similar niche in terms of their overall tone. Alphadream decided to go in a very different direction for Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. This game, from start to finish, is an absolute farce. And I mean that in the best way possible. More than anything, Mario and Luigi is set out to be a fun, lighthearted goofball comedy romp. Way more than any other Mario game had tried to be before. The Mario franchise as a whole would lean into this more in the future, and I honestly believe that this game was a big influence on that. It never takes itself seriously, from the story starting with Peach's voice being turned into dangerous wingdings, to the names of areas, most of which are named after humor, like Teehee Valley, Guarhar Lagoon, Joke's End, or Woohoo University. Even the main villains, Cackletta and Fawful, are largely more comedic, being treated like a very slightly more competent Team Rocket for the majority of the story. The game is always telling some sort of joke. While a lot of them are very obvious and a lot of them don't necessarily land, they usually do. And some of them are pretty subtle, being a when you get it sort of joke. And let me tell you, game, yes, I got it. Don't you think I let that one slip by me. And beyond its direct joke writing, its reference game is obviously pretty good too. It references things like Dr. Mario, Luigi's Mansion, older Mario games including Paper Mario, and even non-Nintendo franchises like Final Fantasy. And oh hey, Geno did show up in a Mario RPG after Super Mario RPG, so everybody can stop complaining. For real, I think Geno showing up here is pretty interesting, as I kind of think that Superstar Saga is the real successor to Super Mario RPG for reasons I'll get into a bit later, but having Geno, one of the breakout characters of that game, make a genuine cameo here definitely helps point that way. Now, while all of this humor is super great on its own, one of the things that I think makes it work so well is how involved Mario and Luigi are in it. Obviously, both Mario brothers are silent protagonists, aside from their little gibberish sound bites when they're talking to other characters, but even then, they are both very present and very active in the humor. They have a very slapsticky feel together, and when interacting with others, their traits are super exaggerated for effect. Like, there's one section where Luigi has to go out on his own to heal Mario after he gets infected with some bad mushroom. How he cowers in the corner as Peach tries to convince him to go is great, but what sells the whole joke is the fact that he's still cowering in fear after the fact. In fact, the only reason he's able to do anything after that point is when a Final Fantasy White Mage Koopa hypnotizes him into thinking he's Mario. I do kind of feel like this is a joke they could have gone further with. Like, they use Mario's sound effects in the room when Luigi is being hypnotized, traumatized, but it goes back to Luigi afterwards. They could have kept Mario's sounds going through the entire section, and they could have even changed the menus to show Luigi thinking he's Mario and stuff, but oh well, that's just huge nitpicking on a joke that is still really good on its own. Mario himself does act a bit more like the straight man, being a lot more standard hero in his actions, dragging Luigi along despite what he wants to do, and even overriding Luigi's decisions to do certain things if it'll help more people. He does get some good stuff here, but out of the two, Luigi is definitely the stronger comedic presence. And I feel like a lot of that comedy between the brothers is thanks to the sprite work, which leads directly into the overall presentation. This game looks awesome. Seriously, it's so well done. All of the sprites are so lovingly crafted, incredibly expressive, super bouncy, and a ton of fun to see in motion. From Mario and Luigi's battle animations while choosing moves, to the bros attacks that all get unique animations which they went really hard on. Seriously, I have no idea how long it would have taken to make these sprites for the advanced Splash Bros move, but I love it. It looks so good. Enemies and side characters get just as much love. Enemies have fun idle animations and attacks, and bosses like Cackletta get some amazing looking sprites. Even the areas and backgrounds look great. The areas are all well detailed and easy to navigate, while all being really unique and interesting as well. And this is something I really need to stress. I'm playing this game on a big 43-inch 4K TV using the Switch Online service. This game and these visuals were designed for a 160p 2.9-inch screen, so aside from playing the game on the base Game Boy Advance, this is basically the worst case scenario for the game's graphics. It's the biggest opportunity to find mistakes or cut corners that would often happen on these smaller handheld games. I really want to give a shout out to all the artists that work on this game. They did an absolutely stellar job here. I really don't have anything negative to say at all. I also want to give a shout out to Yoko Shimomura, the game's composer. If you're not familiar with her incredible work, she's the lead composer for the Kingdom Hearts series and has contributed to plenty of other great games like Mario & Rabbids Sparks of Hope, as well as writing the main theme for Xenoblade Chronicles. Oh, and she was the composer for Super Mario RPG. Put another checkmark for this game being Mario RPG's successor, I guess. Her work here is equally great, meshing perfectly with the goofy, cartoony feel the game is going for, and while the GBA wasn't great for audio, like at all since it literally didn't have an audio chip, Shimomura still managed to write some awesome songs that sound great on it. Area tracks like Stardust Fields, and Oho Oasis, make exploring around these areas a ton of fun, and battle tracks like Come On, and Come On Again, so good and fit the battles so well. It's all super great, and I'm really upset that the only song from this game in Smash Bros is a theme from the little add-on bit from the remake, nothing from the base game. With that stuff out of the way, I think it's about time we actually start talking about the gameplay, because there's a lot to talk about here, and we really need to start with the basics, because it's a lot more complicated than it seems. So the game's basic movement is very similar to Super Mario RPG in a lot of ways. It's a mostly top-down affair where Mario can move around, jump to get onto platforms, that sort of thing. The jump even feels similar. It feels fine, a little bit better than Super Mario RPG because this game isn't isometric, so you can actually sort of see where you're jumping most of the time. There is the occasional hiccup with depth and height where certain things don't really seem to be where they actually are, but that's not a big deal. But that is just the most basic of basics. Obviously, you're not just controlling Mario in this game, you've got Luigi tagging along on the adventure as well. In most games, when you have a follower character, they'll kind of just go along with whatever the main character is doing, so you never really have to worry about them, you just have to make sure that the character you're controlling is doing everything you want them to. Mario and Luigi bucked that trend by making both Mario and Luigi directly controllable, sort of. While whoever is following will do the exact same direct movements as the leader, you don't have to tell Luigi to walk to the right when Mario is doing the same, you do need to tell him to jump, and this is done on a separate button from the main one. So yeah, platforming in this game depends on you being able to get Mario and Luigi around together while having to tell them to jump separately. This typically doesn't end up being much of an issue, since for 99% of obstacles, as long as you just press both buttons at the same time, both brothers will jump to whatever platform or ledge just fine. Where things start to get more complicated is with the other commands. Early on in the game, these two weirdo toads show up to teach Mario some bros actions that they can use to get from place to place. When Mario is in front, Luigi gets the ability to do a high jump, which can get the brothers to higher ledges, and when Luigi is in front, Mario gets the ability to do a spin jump, letting both brothers traverse much farther distances than normal in the air. These are both great abilities that make platforming much easier and more interesting. Oh wait, did I say easier? I meant tedious. Yeah, when you're selecting a bros move, you can't do a regular jump, so you have to manually swap between not only the leader, but also the action in order to move around. This honestly isn't that awful until much later on, since the brothers get many more overworld abilities. First, they get their hammers, which they can use to break rocks and stuff, big surprise there, I'm sure. They also get the ability to use their hammers to not just make their brothers mad if used from behind as well. Mario gets to shrink so he can fit into small areas, and Luigi gets blasted into the ground and can fit underneath certain gates. Luigi being grounded is a particularly useful ability, since it'll be used for a ton of collecting on top of puzzle solving. In the world, you'll occasionally see these indents in the ground. Bury Luigi there, and when he digs himself up, you'll find yourself a bean. These are used to upgrade stats and stuff, but I'll get into that later. I honestly think these are my favorite abilities for a few reasons. One is that the puzzle solving is way cooler here, since you can swap between the brothers and control them separately, which let the developers go way further into puzzle solving that involves multiple rooms and stuff like that, which I really like. I also really like them because, well, the platforming is far simpler and easier when you just have one brother to move around. Back to that, the brothers also get hand abilities here. Mario gets the power of the Firebrand and Luigi the Thunder Hand. I always knew that Luigi had some sort of electric affinity in some way, but I honestly never knew that it came from this game, so that's cool. These can be used to activate switches if used from the front, and from behind gets special abilities. Luigi can paralyze Mario to fit through tight obstacles, and Mario can light a fire under Luigi's ass to do a high-speed dash. These are all really cool abilities that make puzzle solving and exploration a blast. It's just that using them all in close proximity to each other is inelegant, to say the least. The first reason for this is that these are all on a cycle for each brother. Mario swaps through with R and Luigi with L. While yeah, there's only like 4 max per cycle, I've never liked this sort of ability management. It's one of my least favorite things about Super Metroid, and it isn't any more fun here. In fact, it's less fun because there's actually 2 different ability loadouts you need to worry about. Let's say Mario's out front here, and you need to use Luigi's Thunderhand ability on a switch. Oh, Luigi's already on Thunder, so that's great. I'll just swap around and, oh, now he's on jump. Listen, I get that this was probably because of the high and spin jumps, which are only on the brother in behind, but it still sucks. It's always a pain in the ass to find anything you're wanting to use at any time, and while yeah, it only takes a few seconds for each one, you're going to be doing it hundreds of times throughout the game, so it adds up, and if you fat finger past the one you need, you will need to go through the entire cycle all over again. Now that I've played the game a few times, I'm a bit more used to the whole thing and can more reliably remember how to get a specific thing set up quickly, but during my first playthrough it got atrocious at times and it made exploring and platforming a lot less intuitive than I feel like it could have been. But thankfully, as counterintuitive as these controls can get, it's not nearly as big of a deal as it could have been because of the world. The Bean Kingdom is actually set up a lot like a 2D Zelda game. It's a big square full of interconnected screens that make up the whole. What's most important though is the fact that the world is absolutely tiny. Despite despite it looking like there could be a lot here, it only takes a few minutes at most to get from one side of the world to the other. I really appreciated this because thanks to the relatively small world, despite the fact that I never really got the hang of the overworld ability toggling, at least outside of dungeons, getting around and progressing was quick and easy, and that's not even mentioning the fast travel pipes that are around basically every important landmark and dungeon. Another thing that made getting around a lot more fun than it could have been is everything else spread around the world. Alphadream really leaned hard into Nintendo's handheld game philosophy by turning basically everything you need to do into a small little micro game, a little fun activity to make something that would be a bit more mundane in most games into something that is a little more interesting. Take coin blocks for example. In most Mario games you'd jump to hit a coin block and get as many coins as the block would allow. That's how it works in almost every instance. But in this game, coin blocks can be turned into little mini games which make the act of getting these coins much more interesting, more challenging, and a bit more randomized. For instance, there are these arrow blocks which once hit will move left and right, forcing you to jump with the right brother to get the most amount of coins. Or the random blocks which will show an M or an L, again making you use the right brother. My favorite are these blocks which you have to time hits with after each coin you earn, the block moving back and forth faster and faster. These are a ton of fun and I'm really surprised this sort of coin block hasn't become a mainstay in the series as a whole. And these minigames extend far beyond that too, often being worked into dungeons for progression. It turns what would be pretty bog standard dungeon crawling and level design into areas that on top of the normal RPG level design have these little bits of fun additions everywhere you go. I honestly feel like this makes up for a lot of the counterintuitive platforming controls since there will always be something small and fun around every corner. What I find to be really funny about these ones in particular is that in my experience, these minigames end up being typically far more difficult than any of the game's main battles. And on that note, I want to start talking about the battle system because interestingly enough, my policy of playing a game through twice is a lot more relevant than it normally is, but I'll get into that when the time comes. Mario & Luigi's battle system is set up much like a more standard turn-based RPG than most of the other Mario RPGs. You've got all of your normal fare here, solo attacks, items, special bros moves, the ability to run, that sort of thing, all represented by these blocks that you jump into to activate, which is fun. The stat distribution is pretty standard as well. You've got your HP, attack, defense, speed, that sort of thing, and stash, which is basically just luck. What is pretty cool about stats is that while some of these upgrades are predetermined for each brother, you also get a little stat roulette every time you level up. You get to choose which stat to apply it to, then roll for a bonus upgrade for that stat. Each brother will have a bit of a different stat distribution, which affects what they're best at in battle. Mario will typically be faster and do more damage than Luigi, but conversely, Luigi's defense will be higher as well as his critical rate thanks to his burlier stash. This is good because for the most part, both brothers operate identically in battle otherwise. I do sort of understand why, but I wish the developers put a bit more of each brother's established properties into their battle style. Like Luigi's jump could do more damage, but his hammer could be weaker, that sort of thing. There are ways to make them more unique though, which brings me to the equipment system, which is yet another aspect of this game that is very similar to Super Mario RPG. There are three types of equipment in Superstar Saga. Clothing and badges are two sides of the same coin basically. They both increase stats while providing a new, unique effect to them. For instance, Mush Power will greatly increase damage based on how many mushrooms you're carrying, or First Strike will guarantee the brother wearing this equipment will move first in most battles. The only differentiator is which stat one increases. Clothing increases defense and badges increase power. But what's more interesting are the accessories which you will need to unlock. In Bean Bean Castle Town, there is a cafe run by Professor E. Gadd, and by collecting those beans I mentioned earlier, you can turn them into special drinks that will increase stats. That's fine, I guess, it's not really a big deal, but more importantly, by brewing each drink once, E. Gadd will show up with a new unique cutscene and will give you a new accessory. These have some of the most powerful, useful abilities in the game. For instance, Power Grip lets you never drop the hammer during hammer defensive action commands, which is really good, and Great Force doubles your damage while also doubling the damage you receive. This is probably the most broken thing in the entire game, but in order to get an idea why, it's about time we start going over the actual gameplay mechanics here. Just like in the overworld, each brother is controlled using a different button. If it's Mario's turn, you have to navigate menus using the A button, and when you're using Luigi, you have to use the B button. This is another one of those necessary evils because, yeah, no other game like ever would make make you do that. It's pretty counterintuitive for people used to RPGs, and things can be pretty confusing since there would normally be a button to go back in a menu, but pressing B to go back while you're controlling Mario would just make Luigi jump pointlessly. But it is a necessary evil because of how the game handles its action commands, which makes this battle system one of the most unique, interesting, and fun that I've ever seen. With your standard attacks, there isn't that much to talk about. Just time the proper button press at the right time and you'll do more damage, a lot more actually, because you'll get punished really hard for completely missing the action commands. Where things start to get more interesting and where I start to fall in love with this system are the bros moves. Just like out in the overworld, Mario and Luigi can combine their abilities in battle to perform special attacks. These will typically do more damage than standard attacks and will often have special properties as well, like Luigi's Thunder Bros move attacking all enemies. But it's not the move properties I love, it's the action commands. Each bros move has its own unique action command, which is a combination of various A and B presses. I'm amazed by how well detailed these moves are in their animation and design. Not only does the move have animations for when you perform them properly, but it also has different ones for failing each of these commands. Like the Fire Bros move, done properly, Luigi will hit Mario's fireballs back at the enemy with his hammer. But if you mess up, he'll just get hit by the fire, run off screen, and then hit the enemy from behind. The game actually teaches you how to use these really well too. In the menu for these moves, you'll see a number from 1 to 3. At number 1, the move will be its weakest, but it will not only show the button you need to press for the action command, but it will slow the game down to make that button press easier for the player. Number 2 removes the slowdown effect, and number 3 removes the button prompt as well, but reduces the amount of bros points needed to use the move. I adore this. It's a perfect risk versus reward mechanic. Sure, it's a lot easier to use the moves if you have the assistants on, but they aren't going to be as effective as they could be, and they're going to require more resources in order to pull off. But by letting you progressively turn these handicaps off, it effectively encourages you to use these moves, practice their inputs and timing, in order to not only be more effective with them, but also letting you be more liberal with their use. It is so cool, and I had a ton of fun every time I was trying to learn a new one of these moves. That being said, some of these moves are clearly better than others, so there was a bit less of an incentive to learn them all. But at least the game gives the option to learn them properly, which is something I can't really say about the advanced or super moves. After a while, by using a move enough, the brothers will think of a new way to do something with that move, and an advanced move will be unlocked. These are typically more powerful versions of these moves with different properties. Like the Splash Bros move gains the ability to be used on spiky enemies when the normal command would just get Mario poked. I love a lot of these, and like I said earlier, some of them have some of the most impressive sprite work in the entire game, but if you're like me, you'll probably never know how to do any of these without outside assistance. Just to be clear, the game will give you the same learning tools for the advanced commands if you know that they exist and you go looking for them. But in my playthroughs, by the time I had moves advanced, I was only using the third variant of it. There'd be no reason not to, and so I honestly never knew what the advanced thing meant until I went online and looked up the commands. I thought the move was just more powerful for the longest time, since without the button prompt hints, you'd never know there were other commands unless you were to stumble upon them by accident. Now, this isn't a huge deal. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if these were listed in the game's manual, but for people 20 years in the future, it would have been nice to have a pop-up when the first advanced move is unlocked, something saying like, "A new command has been unlocked. Use version 1 of the move to learn how it works." Just something small like that to clue people in that these advanced moves are separate commands that you can learn like any other would have been a big help. And really, the learning is what the game is all about, which brings me to the other half of the game's action commands, the enemy ones. This is where the game really sets itself apart from not only the other Mario RPGs, but basically every other RPG franchise out there. Unlike other RPGs where you taking damage is pretty much guaranteed, and the challenge comes from properly managing your resources and stats to make sure that no matter what happens, you don't hit zero, Mario and Luigi gives the player the opportunity to never take any damage at all. See, unlike Mario RPG or Paper Mario's action commands, which give you the option to reduce the amount of damage you take, Mario and Luigi once again goes for an all or nothing minigame for its action commands. There's actually a lot of moving parts here, so I'll try to keep it simple and get to this methodically. Let's say that an enemy is going to attack Mario. Well, then one of two things will happen. Depending on the attack, Mario will be able to either dodge the attack by jumping over it, or will be able to smack the enemy away with his hammer. The game sets this all up for you, so thankfully there's no guesswork there. Most enemies will have a few different timings, so you can't just rely on muscle memory for every new encounter, here, and there are a few enemies that can knowledge trap you into taking damage. For instance, these enemies in the Hooniversity, if they're far away, you will need to jump through the rings to dodge the move. But if they're up close, jumping to avoid damage will just get you hit, so you need to pay attention to enemy patterns and positioning to keep the bros healthy. But beyond just avoiding damage, depending on the move, you can also deal damage back to the enemy that tried to hit you. You can do this with most moves, you just need to time your jumps just right so when the enemy attacks, you stomp on them instead. It kinda just happens automatically on hammer blocking. But, just like every other aspect in this game, it's not just Mario that you need to worry about. Luigi can also be attacked, and just like everywhere else, his dodging uses a different button to Mario. So you will need to individually control both brothers to make sure that regardless of which one is targeted, you'll be able to dodge their moves. This idea is far and away its best with moves that sweep through the area Mario and Luigi are standing in, forcing you to dodge individually. For most moves, however, this is kind of exploitable. Sure, most enemies will either target Mario or Luigi, but when they attack, they will always attack with the same timing. So if you are fighting enemies that have very subtle hints as to who they're targeting, you can literally just press both buttons at the same time and bypass the entire mechanic. And that's really unfortunate because I feel like the design intent here was for the player to pay attention to these attacking cues and then use the proper brother to dodge attacks effectively. But it would be really hard to incentivize the player to do that because of how punishing it can be to take damage in this game. And that brings me to something that really isn't normally a primary focus in my videos, the difficulty. So like I just said, the game can get to be absolutely punishing if you don't know what you're doing, and that's kind of weird because you typically don't associate most Nintendo games with punishing. And over the course of my playthroughs, I've been trying to figure out why it would be this way. Is it due to the lack of healing items? Not really. Is it due to me being underleveled? No, while I probably was a bit of a lower level than most, it's not like Xenoblade where enemies that are higher level than you get buffs to make them even more insurmountable or anything. By the time I got about halfway through my second playthrough, I think I figured it out. Earlier on, I said that some enemies will knowledge trap you by exploiting a lack of knowledge to force you into taking damage. See, in my opinion, the entire game's difficulty is built on these knowledge traps. Every new enemy you see are all new attacks that you don't know how to dodge, which will eventually guarantee damage. Damage that in the right circumstances can be devastating. When you're taking a lot of damage, you'll need to heal a lot, and since the game doesn't have any healing outside of items, you'll either need to trudge your way back to the nearest town from wherever you are to get more resources, or try to press on while possibly being unprepared for what's to come. And since you'll be spending more money on healing items to keep yourself alive, you won't have as much to upgrade your armor or badges, which otherwise would be able to elevate stats enough to largely balance out the lack of healing. Add on the process of learning things like bros moves, which when starting out will cost more resources, do less damage, and be much more likely to fail, making battles, specifically boss encounters, last much longer and more likely to be dangerous than they would be otherwise. So it's all of these things that snowball together to make a game that on your first playthrough with a complete lack of knowledge of anything the game does, that makes the game's difficulty what it is, and honestly, aside from one encounter I'll go into later, that was a huge reason I had so much fun during my first run. But it's that design philosophy that, for me, someone who values replayability and a game's ability to maintain that experience on those secondary playthroughs, that really hurts Superstar Saga's staying power. What happens when you know all of the game's tricks, when you've seen everything it can throw at you and it can't exploit that lack of knowledge anymore? Well, it becomes a cakewalk and loses a lot of the bite that made the system so engaging in the first place. Now, let me be perfectly clear. Every single game in existence gets easier with knowledge and experience. Without difficulty adjustments to the game itself, no game will get harder on a second playthrough by knowing what the game can do and how to surpass it. The issue is that Mario and Luigi's entire difficulty balance is built upon that lack of knowledge, and everything the game does to manage that difficulty just goes away entirely when you know what you're doing. You won't be taking nearly as much damage since you'll be able to dodge basically every attack. You won't need to spend nearly as much money on healing items since you won't be taking that damage, letting you upgrade armor and badges more frequently and with more efficiency. And since you'll already know the timings for all the bros moves, you'll never have to go through that learning process. You'll get the strongest, cheapest version of those moves right from the start. All of a sudden, encounters that would have been challenging just aren't anymore. Bosses that have a lot of cool moves and interesting mechanics no longer intricate to show any of them off anymore since they're erased before they have a chance to do anything. And strategies that you would have used to get past some tougher spots don't need to be done anymore. Adding on badges like Mush Power, which only get more powerful by hoarding resources, and the Great Force accessory, which for experienced players is basically just a free 2x damage multiplier, you should be starting to see my point. What really bugs me about this whole thing is that adding a hard mode wouldn't really solve any of these issues. They're baked into the fabric of the game design. Yeah, you could make bosses hit harder or have more HP, but the length of encounters and their immediate danger don't matter much when you aren't getting hit by anything. It doesn't make the game any harder in that instance, just longer. You could also randomize attack timings, but that would just make the experience even more punishing and kind of ruin the whole point of the game, which hinges on being able to learn and use that knowledge to do better in battles. It really puts the whole battle system in between a rock and a hard place. The core of playing the game hinges on that first experience, how a lack of knowledge forces you into learning on the fly, with the balance depending on you using your resources to learn, making mistakes, and not being fully 100% prepared for everything. But there's no way to emulate that ever again, and changing anything about the game mechanically would effectively ruin it. Ultimately, while I do love this battle system for what it is, it's hard for me to say that I love it as much as many other battle systems, at least when considering the whole experience and the context of how I like to enjoy games, not just once, but many times. Superstar Saga's battle system is pretty darn close to a 10 out of 10 on a first playthrough. It is fun, challenging, interesting, and made me want to engage with it more so I could learn what it had to offer. But on a second playthrough, it lost most of that. It was still fun, sure, but it had no challenge, had no surprises, and since I basically had nothing left to learn, I didn't feel as engaged with it as I was earlier. I'm interested to see if this problem is something that transfers to the entire series, or if the team at Alphadream managed to mitigate this lack of replayability somehow in later installments. And with that, I think it's about time we head back towards the story. Now, if you're worried about spoilers in a 20-year-old Mario game, you can feel free to skip to this section here, but there really isn't that much to be spoiled by, and I do have a few things to talk about, so let's go. Just as the bros are about to enter the Bean Bean Kingdom, Fawful shows up and ruins the party by wrecking the airship and forcing it to crash. The bros end up just at the border, and after a mini-game, they get to cross into the kingdom. They find Bowser, who's got himself stuck in a cannon, and despite paying 100 Bean Bean coins, which they had to gather since Mushroom Kingdom coins are worth only about 8% of a Bean Bean coin, to prevent this border guard from firing it off, that weird toad dude blasts Bowser away, so we'll definitely never see him again. After this, the bros head to Hoo Hoo Village, but they can't progress since Fawful has blocked the path out of town. So they head up a mountain to find a special stone that these guys can use to turn into hammers. At the peak, they fight this weird dinosaur thing who was actually the Bean Bean Kingdom's prince that Cackletta had transformed. After getting hammers, Mario and Luigi head to Bean Bean Castle to meet with the queen about Peach's stolen voice and Cackletta's plans. However, the ambassador doesn't believe that Mario and Luigi are themselves, so they are sent to do some plumbing. Unfortunately for them, this just played into Cackletta's plans, as for some reason the castle's plumbing being broken was what was keeping the Bean Bean Kingdom's greatest treasure, the Bean Star, locked up and safe, and by getting the pipes flowing again, it let Cackletta take the Bean Star. The Bean Star is important to the people of the Bean Bean Kingdom, since this star can grant any wish that the person who has it wants, but it can only be woken from its slumber by someone with a pure voice. Conveniently, Princess Peach is apparently the only person alive who has a pure enough voice, which is why Cackletta stole it at the start of the game. After a fight with an infected Queen Bean and a trip to the Coca-Cola factory to get some pop, Queen Bean is cured and the brothers are off to get the Bean Star back from Cackletta at Woohoo University. At this point, I was kind of thinking I was reaching the end of the game. The villain has everything she needs to take over the world: Peach's voice, the Bean Star, and a head start. But upon reaching the Bean Star, something interesting happens. Cackletta uses robot Peach clones to speak to the Bean Star, hoping to wake it up. But something goes wrong and the Bean Star flies into a rage rather than properly awakening. Something is definitely up here. After a fight with Cackletta, which seemingly defeats her for good since Fawful has to vacuum up her essence to escape, the bros head down to find the Bean Star. It's here that this guy Popple and the Rookie, who have been thorns in Mario and Luigi's side for the last while, fight again for the star. However, a Peach bot falls down and starts screaming again. This causes the Bean Star to frenzy and fly up into the air, and it's here that the Rookie remembers that he's Bowser, just minutes before the Beanstar explodes into pieces and sends him flying. Back with Mario and Luigi, who are somewhere else entirely now, make their way back towards the Bean Castle after gaining the Firebrand and Thunderhand abilities to hear some shocking news. Peach is actually heading to the Bean Kingdom as they speak, and they need to head to the airport to meet her ASAP. As this is happening, Fawful and Cackletta, still licking their wounds after the previous events, finds the unconscious Bowser and unleashes Cackletta's essence onto him, which definitely can't be good. Back at the castle, more bombshells are dropped. It turns out that Peach's voice was never actually stolen in the first place. Queen Bean knew about Cackletta's plans and warned the Mushroom Kingdom ahead of time so they could properly protect Princess Peach, while ensuring that Cackletta was unable to go forward with her plans to use the Beanstar. To do this, they had Birdo take Peach's place in disguise, which is why the Beanstar got so angry. Peach's voice wasn't being used at all, it was Birdo's. Now, Peach visiting the Bean Kingdom is probably a tactical blunder, for as all they know, Cackletta is still around and still plotting to get Peach's voice, but whatever, that would never come back to bite them in the future, I'm sure. Oh wait, it does immediately. Right after taking Princess Peach to Fungi Town, Cackletta, now possessing Bowser's body, kidnaps Peach and starts using her as ransom. In order to get Peach back, Mario and Luigi will have to travel around the world and get back all 4 pieces of the Beanstar and bring them to her on Joke's End, a place far to the northeast of the kingdom. Peasley bets this amount of Mushroom Kingdom coins that he'll get it first, and they go searching. After some mini-games, a collectathon, and a dungeon, Mario and Luigi get all the pieces first, and Peasley actually pays out his side of the bet. But thanks to the new exchange rate, this ends up being only worth 99 Bean coins. Man, inflation really hit the Mushroom Kingdom hard. Anyways, it's time to get Peach back. Prince Peasley has a plan to achieve this. He has made a very, very good fake Beanstar to try to hand off to Cackletta instead of the real one, hoping for her to fall for that, hand over Peach, and be left with nothing. Just before they go, Toadsworth hands us a second dress for Peach to wear because the one she's got on has probably gotten dirty, and they head off. Mario uses his beloved brother as a surfboard to reach Joke's End, which is probably the biggest, most difficult dungeon in the entire game. It's huge, is full of tough battles, lots of split Mario and Luigi puzzles, and your choice of boss at the end, which is very considerate. Once it's all done, Fawful immediately sees through the ruse and breaks the fake Beanstar. Thanks, Peasley, and takes the real one. It's here where Mario and Luigi hatch another plan to get Peach back. Mario approaches Bowletta and Fawful and tricks them into thinking that this totally real Peach that he has with him is the real one, and the one they nabbed was another fake. Being stupid, they immediately fall for this, and Mario is able to get Peach to safety. This leaves Luigiette on a repaired Bowser Cruiser with Cackletta and Fawful, but is able to escape with the Beanstar because he is the real hero. Furious that her plans have been foiled again, Bowletta detours to the Mushroom Kingdom and takes Bowser's mobile castle into the Bean Kingdom and just starts obliterating the place. The entire city is destroyed, and this has to be stopped before the entire country is, so Mario and Luigi have one final task: to head into Bowser's castle and take out Bowletta. After another fun dungeon with a bit of a boss gauntlet with all the Koopalings and Fawful, the bros finally meet Bowletta and the final battle begins. So I had said that this game can get pretty punishing every once in a while. Well, 99% of that is right here. I have no idea what the designers were thinking here, but this boss, particularly the start of Phase 2, has one of the absolute worst game design decisions I've ever seen. Phase 1 is fine, it's got some cool moves that have some fun action commands, nothing too challenging, but some of these require a bit more thought to get out unscathed from. After the fight, Mario and Luigi have seemingly won, but this was just a trick to get them to drop their guard, and upon doing so, Bowletta defeats them and swallows them into Bowser's belly, starting Phase 2. This is where things start to get absolutely horrendous. So I've stated that a huge point of this game is learning enemy attack patterns, dodge timings, and the like. This is usually not an issue, since even if you do take damage, well, that sucks, but you could easily keep practicing and learning without losing much. For this fight, you start with both Mario and Luigi at 1 HP, and unless you've already beaten the game and know what's coming, you're in for absolute misery. Cackletta gets 3 attacks before Mario can move, so that means you need to know how to perfectly dodge Cackletta's moves before you have a chance to even start the fight. I died to this fight more times than I can remember. It got to the point where I even set up a save state in the Nintendo Switch Online system at the start of Phase 2 just so I don't have to see the game over screen and do the entire entire first phase of the fight over again just to get instantly wiped. Admittedly, I think I got really unlucky, and Cackletta would always do her most difficult to dodge moves right out of the gate, but even then, learning the easy moves, you're likely to lose at least one brother early on. And I forgot to mention something about that earlier. When one brother goes down, the other will attempt to dodge all other attacks with them in tow, which means all dodge commands you have to do with the surviving one will be far more difficult. It's hard enough to get through this phase with both alive, one brother dropping is functionally identical to an automatic wipe. This straight up almost ruined the entire game for me. I got so angry that the game would do this in phase 2 of the final boss that if I didn't have save states in my first playthrough, I may have just given up. I have no problems with difficult bosses, I like a good challenge, but this is simply unfair and straight up bad game design. Thankfully, once you have bashed your head against a wall long enough to break a hole in it, the fight gets much more reasonable and fun. The gimmick here is that in order to deal damage to Cackletta, you have to hit her heart, which you can only make vulnerable by destroying all 3 other parts, the head and 2 hands. This was a long and methodical fight and escalated well with newer, more dangerous versions of her attacks as time went on. Eventually she goes down, and after a quick escape section, the game ends pretty much just like that. Cackletta is gone, the Beanstar is safe, and everyone is having a good time on the plane back to the Mushroom Kingdom. I don't actually mind the more fast-paced, less sentimental ending of the game here. I guess they could have made the escape a bit more climactic, but this was never a game that was designed to cause feelings or whatever, so the fact that I never got to say goodbye to this shopkeeper or that bean guy doesn't really matter that much. And that was Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. I don't really know what to say at this point. This game has earned a reputation over the last 20 years of being one of the best Mario RPGs around, and I've come to not only understand that reputation, but agree with it entirely. It's a hilarious romp through a fun new world with some really interesting mechanics, some inventive, if unintuitive platforming, and a decently challenging and fun RPG battle system that felt like a fun evolution and spiritual successor to Super Mario RPG. It's just so unfortunate that a lot of that luster is ever so slightly tarnished on subsequent playthroughs due to its reliance on a lack of knowledge being the backbone of the game's difficulty and progression systems. Ultimately though, this is a fantastic game that is well worth playing through at least once. Its sprite work is among my favorites in the era, it's super creative all the way through, it's chock full of fun small things to do, and yeah, if you are new to the battle system, you're bound to get a decently challenging and rewarding experience. That being said, of all the games in this series, the one I've heard the least about is the next one up in this retrospective, Partners in Time. I hope that just means it's more of the same and isn't a sign of bad things to come. Anyways, I'll see you there, or maybe then. Thank you all very much for watching.